Hi class, today we're going to be talking about modern establishment law or disestablishment law. This idea that laws need to be made in such a way that they do not establish a religion, nor do they move towards an establishment of religion. That's very important. So we're going to talk about that today. Since Everson versus the Board of Education in 1947, government disestablishment law has been reduced to a single term phrase, neutrality, that is. And this idea that government neither favors religion nor is antagonistic towards religion. Now, it's my personal belief that the court has been used in many ways to be antagonistic towards religion. And as George Orwell said in Animal Farm, that some animals are created more equal than others. And in that way, I believe that neutrality tends to benefit those who are secularists or non-religious more than it does the religious population. And so I don't believe that all things are really neutral. That's personally my opinion. And as we look at the court cases and we can make distinctions or comparisons between them, I believe that that becomes quite apparent. Now, when bringing a disestablishment or an establishment case before the court, the claimant must make it clear that a law or action by the government, not that it has actually established an establishment, but that it is merely making steps towards an establishment, and that if it keeps going that way, that it will actually eventually end up as an establishment. Now, a claimant in making an establishment case, they don't have the burden to show that the government has actually established religion. All they really have to do is show that the government has merely taken steps towards an establishment of religion, that if it takes this step and it takes another step, eventually down the road, there will be an official establishment of religion. And so this idea of modern establishment law is there to quash that progression. And so it's kind of like with Eve, when the serpent says, so God said you can't eat from any of the trees of the garden, and Eve says, well, he said that we cannot eat nor touch of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Originally, God didn't say you couldn't touch, you just couldn't eat from it. But what Eve did was she added what's called a theological fence to it. You can't eat or touch. Well, in this case, it's not that the government can't establish a religion. In this case, they can't even take steps towards an establishment of religion because that would trigger the Establishment Clause. Now, there's several ways by which, or steps by which, the government could establish a religion, and they can do several of these things, and here's a list as we go along. The government can improperly fund religion, can support religion in one way or the other with people, resources, or the like, or they can endorse religion. They could they could coerce parties into religious action or worship. They can indoctrinate, or they can use education somehow to establish religion. We're going to see a lot of cases involving religion. They can make improper use of sanctuaries. Somehow the government can use church buildings or resources in that way, symbols or services that they can use, and that can often trigger an establishment case, and each one of these has a case tagged to it. They can ally themselves with religious causes, people of the church, that is clerics, the priests, the pastors, the rabbis, the imams, and if they ally themselves improperly, that can trigger an Establishment Clause, or even religious corporations. Hobby Lobby is a religious organization, and Chick-fil-A is allegedly a Christian organization, and if the government somehow improperly funds or allies themselves with them, that you could make the claim that this is an establishment, or at least leading down the road to the establishment of religion. Imagine some college saying, yeah, come on in, Chick-fil-A, and be on our campus and you'll make a lot of money. And all of a sudden somebody says, wait a minute, the state school can't do this because that's a religious corporation, and in doing so you are endorsing their religious views. And so the reason I mentioned Chick-fil-A is because in the past the president of them came out against same-sex marriage, and in doing so incurred the wrath of all those who are in favor of same-sex marriage, and he did so on the basis of his religion. And so he's a corporation, they're incorporated, and so his religious views are tied to his corporation, and thus a state giving money to a state institution, that is the university, giving money to them, that ends up being in their mind an endorsement or step down the path towards an establishment of religion. The state can indiscriminately favor or prefer some religious interests over others. Individuals, they can prefer some people who are religious over others, and or they can prefer some institutions over others. And in doing so, if they do any of these, and we can give examples of these, we would be able to trigger an establishment case. And that's what you must do in order to do that. So claimants, they must meet the same requirements to establish or to bring a case as do the free exercise claimants. All right, so what must they do? Well, they must state an actual case or controversy. They can't just say, well, hypothetically, if you make this law, this could happen, and so we're going to bring this here. And no, it actually has to be a particular issue that is actually occurring, and in that regard, you can't just make it up out of fiat. Second, it must have standing, or the person or the plaintiff claimant must have standing. And standing is the legal right to bring a lawsuit to court. It requires that a plaintiff or the person who brings the case has either been affected by the events in the case or will be eminently affected. That is, it's going to happen, if nothing is done about it. And they're eminently affected or harmed if the court does not address the problem. And so they show that if you make this law or establish this, allow this to continue, I will be harmed. So the discussion here with the slides that I've made all come from your text and your readings. And so what I expect you to be able to do is analyze that which is said. I'll put up some cases, and I'd like you to be able to show how these cases apply to the PowerPoint, and how the principles I've just laid out apply to these cases. And you'll be able to say, this is a case of establishment or a road towards establishment. And so you can see the cases, and you'll certainly have several of them.